Yes, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I never know what quite to say at this point of the season, but one of those works for you, I hope. So hey, we are glad that you are here with us today. Really, before we get started, we just want to kind of have just a moment of celebration, if we will. So over the past really kind of month, we've been really challenging you guys to be able to something that we always call Christmas Made Possible, where we just simply invited you to take part in help making, in this particular instance, Caroline Wenzel Elementary School, just simply bringing in brand new beanies, brand new hats, brand new gloves, mittens, scarves, socks, all that kind of fun, warm stuff that is absolutely needed on a stinking day like today. Holy cow, right? But you guys stepped up huge, and so we were able to just gift that school with loads upon loads of warm clothes for a bunch of kids in need. So give it up for yourselves in that. Way to go. Way to go. Also, on top of that, if you were here for our Christmas Eve worship service, it was a great, great night. But of course, every year, we kind of gave you guys a little peek as to what that was going to look like. We do a manger offering every year that goes with some sort of church planting initiative where we're starting new churches. And so this year, we were able to collect over $800 that we're sending overseas to start new churches in India. So again, that is spectacular as well. So way to go. Thank you guys for that, for your generosity and just that whole vision on side of that. So it's very, very cool. Well, hey, if I have not met you yet, my name is Scott. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm incredibly excited and honored, of course, as I always am, to be able to teach this morning. Thank you, Pastor Mike, for the opportunity to give the word today. But here's just kind of fun, right? Those of you who've kind of been around for a while, we're back to like one service, right? For today, right? Chill, right? For today, it's kind of exciting, some new faces around. You're kind of being able to kind of check out some folks that maybe you haven't seen for a little bit, because when you have two services, things are kind of spread apart, right? You come to your service, you sit in your seat, nobody else better sit in your seat, right? And so then you don't necessarily see the folks that come to service after or before you or whatever. But here's the thing, right? So it is 10:33. We normally have like a 10:45 service. So when the late folks roll in who might not have been privy to such information as you, try not to judge them too harshly, alrighty? Maybe just a slight sideways glance, maybe a sigh of disapproval, not too loud, right? Just so they know that you're better than them, all right? That's just where we're going to stop it right there, okay? No, that's right. Don't be too hard on them, because the truth be told, if you're anything like me, I and probably you are probably hardest on yourself as I am hardest on myself. Would that be true for anyone in this room today? Yes, absolutely. I mean, the old saying really does ring true, is that we really are our own worst critic. And even for me, I am my own worst critic. And honestly, when I think about what we're going to go today, it's not that I have achieved these incredible, wonderful things in my life. On top of that, I also don't feel like I've necessarily reached the top of my game, but sometimes I just have a hard time just enjoying my own accomplishments. And this week, as I was kind of prepping for where we were going to go today, I started to kind of ask myself, why is that? Why is it that I feel like I just can't necessarily enjoy the certain things that I accomplish, the certain things that I succeed at all, whatever that might look like for you, whatever that might look like for me, right? And I began to kind of realize, I think it's because I'm a little bit fearful. Maybe part of it is that I'm fearful that maybe I'll come across as boastful. Or maybe on the other side of that, maybe I'm a little bit fearful that I'll become lazy, and that one accomplishment, that one accolade, that one big win, big success will be as good as it gets, and I'll be doomed to live my life telling people all about the good old days. So because of that, because of my own warped mind, my own brain, because of that, sometimes I have a really hard time enjoying my accomplishments. Sometimes, and if this is you, you can raise your hand along with me, we become very performance-based. Anyone else with me? Absolutely, right? That's just how we are. And now don't get me wrong, I'm not the guy that just completely just disengages with whatever great things happen, right? I always do acknowledge great things that happen. I always like to spend the time and just to recognize whatever accomplishment I have made, whatever my personal kind of success is in that, but then I always seem to be moving on to whatever is coming next. It's as if I know that, yes, I did this great thing, but there's always 2, 3, 4, 5, 60 other things bigger and better that I could be doing and that I should be doing. It's really kind of screwy, if you will. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you smell exactly what I'm stepping in up here, right? And this is completely irrational. Let me just go ahead and put that out there. Those of you who think this way, you have to know, I know that it is completely irrational. Because sometimes I begin to project these things onto the people that are close around me. Like my wife or my girls, right? If they do something great, yes, congratulations, that's wonderful. But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, enjoy your moment. Because it's not going to last, because you still have to do this. Like, way to go, Lila, you took your first steps, but that's the first of many. You better be river dancing right now, right? Like, this is what I think. That's just where I go. And I don't want to do that. I don't know anyone who does want to do that. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be somebody who doesn't know how to enjoy the moment. I want to be able to enjoy moments instead of always looking ahead to what's coming next, to the steps that I feel like I should be taking, or even to the steps that I feel that other people should be taking. But here's what's great about this. Just as there are some of you in this room today, or on the other side of that camera today, and you will have that kind of bend towards you, there are people on the complete other side of the spectrum as well. I mean, there are some people who really know how to savor the moment. Anyone know somebody who just really knows, like, they just know how to savor the moment. They just know how to almost celebrate, right? Like, they're the ones that you want to tell your good news to. Like, you are seeking them out to tell your good news to. Like, they're the ones that make you feel like you just became like the grand marshal of the Rose Parade just because you cleaned out the crock pot, right? There are people like that. And honestly, I kind of want to be like that. I kind of want to be that type of person. I want to be that guy. And as I was thinking, as I was preparing, as I was studying and kind of praying about where we wanted to go, I kind of realized that talk about myself, I think that God wants me to be a little bit like that too. But here's the thing. I know that it's going to take some work for me to be able to get there. I know, and you have to know, if you're bent towards me, you have to know also that we have to begin to not throw our expectations on other people. Otherwise, maybe you know this all too well, the people that you love might not necessarily feel all of that love. They might not ever feel like they're good enough. They'll begin to question that. And so a lot of us, I think that we have got to learn how to relax. We've got to learn how to simply begin to enjoy every step instead of thinking about what's coming next. And for me, and my challenge for us this morning, is that not only do we begin to do that in our own lives, but I also want to begin to acknowledge and encourage the steps that those people around me are taking as well. Because here's the thing, right? This is going to be like your aha moment right here, because none of you have ever thought this before. We all want to be better than we currently are, right? I mean, come on, like that's what we focus on this time of year. Like, welcome to New Year's resolution. Time for the new year. Everyone is trying to figure out this new and improved them that's just waiting to be revealed. Like, that's what it is. We dream about it, we shop for it, we seek it out, we strive for it. I mean, we live with this sense that there is more to us and our lives than wherever we find ourselves right here, right now. And so what's cool is that some of us understand that, and we begin to take steps to achieve that. But then there's other people who, yes, acknowledge there's a better version, there's something bigger that they should be doing, something more exquisite, all those different things, and they just have honestly no idea where to even begin. So regardless of where you find yourself, whatever frame of mind you might find yourself in that dynamic, we have to know that usually the person that we want to become, the place that we see ourselves at, it usually is leaps and bounds ahead of our current reality. That's just what it is. And that level That level that we dream of, that level that we shop for, that we strive to be, that we envision ourselves being, sometimes that might be a level that we may never reach. And maybe that might be a level that you and I were never intended to reach. How's that grab you for like a motivational poster right there, right? Yeah, like doomed to fail, right? Like imagine that on like a motivational poster in your office hallway, right? It's like the focal point where it's like that, probably that little kitten that's like hanging on the wire, right? And like you're doomed to fail, so the kitten just drops cat guts everywhere. Like it's just done, you know? Sorry if you got a kitten for Christmas, right? Kittens, I know, everyone always thinks cats are gross. Can I just go ahead and just acknowledge that right here? That's the truth of this morning, right? Some people love cats. That's fine. That's wonderful. And I get it. You're like, oh, the kittens are so cute. Yeah, baby animals are always cute. Like, that's just what it is. Do you guys remember? I do have notes, don't worry. But do you guys remember like a year and a half ago when like that family like found that bear cub and they were like going to adopt it as their own? And so they're feeding it and playing with it. Guess why you don't hear about them anymore? Because that bear grew up and mauled the entire family. Like, they're done. They're done. It was around this area, I promise. Like, we learned nothing from Siegfried and Roy. Like, come on, we got to figure this out. Whatever. Let's get back to this, all right? Quit getting me off task here. But sometimes when we say statements like that, it feels like we're just striving for mediocrity. And nobody wants to strive for mediocrity. Every single one of us, we should be striving, we should be working to become the very best that we can be. But what if? Just imagine just for a second, right? What if? What if you and I, what if we just quit looking at our lives? What if we just quit looking at our faith as this accomplishment? What if we shifted our gears and we actually started looking at the actual journey, at the actual relationship, at the actual relationships that brought us to wherever we find ourselves today, right now? I mean, come on, what if we actually began to quit seeing the steps that we have yet to take? And we actually maybe kind of moved back a little bit and just started celebrating the ones that we've already taken. What if? What if we not only celebrated our own steps, but what if we began to celebrate those steps in the lives of people around us? What if we began to acknowledge every single movement towards God, every step towards God made by the people that you and I encounter on a daily basis? Because I think that where you think you should be in your relationship with God, whatever your relationship currently looks like, where you think you should be, and let's add on to that where you think that other people should be in their relationship with God, that could be completely different from where God thinks you should be in your relationship with Him. See, in my 30 years of life, I've come to realize that nothing is ever random with God. Nothing is ever random, right? I mean, every step, every success, every failure, every single one of those things are the things that begin to shape who you are as a person. They begin to shape who you are in the world, how you view the world, and how you begin to operate in that world. Let me unpack this just for a moment. There's a story that's just a classic Bible story that a lot of us probably know at least something about. If you don't, I'm going to unpack it a little bit. But the story of David and Goliath is this like classic Bible story. This is what went down. Giant enters the scene. He actually goes down and threatens an army. He throws down a challenge. The army's like, I don't want any part of it, right? No one steps up to fight him. Randomly, out of the bushes, in my opinion, right, walks this little tiny shepherd boy, and he says, I'll do it, right? Everyone kind of laughs and snickers and talks behind his back a little bit, right? But the boy goes out armed with a sling and some rocks, straight up Dennis the Menace style, okay? Giant mocks him. David, the shepherd boy, puts a rock in, slings it, hits the dude in the forehead, giant comes tumbling down. David chops off his head, and the giant is now no longer able to mock anyone ever again. That's the story of David and Goliath. Now, when we read this story, if you have your Bibles, I want you to open up to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel is in the Old Testament. It'll give you guys just a second to get there. But 1 Samuel 17 is where we're going to be in just one moment. But when we read that story, when we hear about that story of David and Goliath, when we picture that, we make it seem like little tiny David made some pretty huge leaps of faith. I mean, that's what we envision. That's what we imagine. That might be what we just assume. But here's the thing for David. Taking down Goliath was just another step. See, what happened is that when David actually entered the scene and said, I'll do it, clearly there were people who were like, no, you will not, and no, you should not, right? So David doesn't just walk up there, no problem, without having to almost talk to people to make sure he's okay to actually legitimately do this, right? There's protocol here, people, all right? And so what we find out is that David has to go and try to convince the king, King Saul, that he should be the one to step up and fight Goliath. So if you have your Bibles, in 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 37, this is what David says to Saul, right here. I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. Okay, right? When a lion or a bear comes up to steal the lamb from the flock, I go after him with a club. This is like real life whack-a-mole almost, okay? And I rescue the lamb from its mouth. I like this, right? Not when, but if the animal turns on me, it's gonna be scared of a kid, right? If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw. The perfect place to grab sharp teeth is by the jaw, mind you, okay? If I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it again to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Here's a translation of that. Here's what David is truly saying. He's saying, look, God guided me before, and I know that God will walk me through this step as well. So I think that what it came down to is when we really kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of this whole conversation is that David himself, he knew how to celebrate every step and he knew how to acknowledge every step. Because the exact same God who helped him kill the bears and the lions would help him kill a giant. I mean, all along, God was preparing David through those steps, through those experiences, through those interactions, long before David ever could even imagine what the next step might be. And maybe for you, you sit there and you're like, but I know more about David's story. I know what else went down. Maybe you know that David's story continues. This isn't the last we hear from David, this big victory battle mindset, right? The story goes on. Maybe you know that David actually grew up to become king. And when he was king, he decided to sleep with another man's wife. She got pregnant. And he used his king power to go ahead and have her husband killed to cover the entire thing up. I mean, David took some pretty huge steps in the wrong direction. But here's what I think is actually the most incredible thing about David. What we see about David is that David knew that even when he took steps away from God, David knew he could always step back. David had that ingrained inside of him, and I'm not going to read it. You can kind of mark it down and read it later, but Psalm 51 is literally a chapter of David's plea to God for forgiveness for what he had done. He's there crying out to God, and finally, in that moment, David realized and recognized that the distance that he was feeling from God was not because God stepped away from him, but it was because David stepped away from God. See, the big truth of this morning, on top of what we already talked about, is just that it's not just the right steps. It's not just the right steps that we take towards God that are worth celebrating. Because the truth of the matter is that every single one of us, all of us, at some point in our lives and at some point in our lives in the future, we will all step away from God at some point. That's something called sin. We'll all step away from God at some point, but that step back to Him, when and if it happens, is something worth celebrating too. And just like David, when we do step back, we very quickly find out, we very quickly realize that although we may have stepped away from God, God never stepped away from us. That, church, is something we're celebrating. But here's the thing. As great of a truth that is, as mind-bending, as mind-altering, as mind-exploding as that could be, sometimes I feel like for you and me, it's really hard for us to truly believe that God's really that gracious. But He is. And on top of the fact that it's hard for us to believe that He's truly that gracious, I think that for some of us, it's even harder for us to extend that grace, to extend that celebration to those people around us. Think about this, another well-known story called the prodigal son. It's in the book of Luke. I'm just going to give you the 1-2 of it all. But Jesus tells a story about a man with 2 sons. That's very important. Remember, there's 2 sons. We'll come back to both of them. 2 sons. The younger one, at one point, he decides that he is just kind of over it. He wants to go out and experience the world, and so he says, Dad, can I have my share of the inheritance right now? And his dad, for one reason or another, agrees. And this young son, he went and he left home, and we read that he literally blew through every last dime. Wasted it. Gone over. Through a series of circumstances, brought him back to his senses, and he began to head back home with this idea of simply becoming a servant at his father's house because of what he did. He just didn't deserve to be family anymore. If you know the story, you know that from a long ways off, from way down the road, the dad spots his younger son walking down the road towards him. So I imagine the dad kicks off his sandals and just books it down the road, gives him a hug, gives him a kiss. And in the middle of his younger son just simply groveling, apologizing to him, in the middle of all of that, his dad almost interrupts him and just decides to throw this gigantic party to celebrate his younger son coming home. And remember, there's 2 boys in here. Enter the older brother. The older brother comes in. Understandably, he's hacked off. I imagine him just beelining up to his dad. They say, Dad, why are you doing that for him? He went and wasted half of your money. He left us. Dad, I've been here all along. I haven't wasted any of your money. I've been a good worker. I've been a good son. I've been faithful. I've been obedient. And again, I imagine the dad in that moment interrupting his son again to say something like this, but we had to celebrate and be glad. But we had to celebrate and be glad. I mean, church, imagine this. There was something so compelling for this father about his son stepping back home. There was something that he literally could not shake. He could not ignore it. He had to celebrate. Church, there are people around us who are taking steps in their relationship with God, taking steps with their faith, and you and I have become completely oblivious. There are people in our vicinity right now, our neighborhood, our culture, our family, our church building right here who are taking steps towards God, but we don't notice. because they're not the steps that we would expect. They're not the steps that we would assume. Maybe those people don't worship the same way that you worship. Maybe those people don't show up to church as often as you show up to church. Maybe they don't know all the right answers, and maybe they don't know how to go about them. Maybe those people don't pray as much as you pray, or maybe they don't pray as much as you say that you pray. Whatever. But regardless, we have to understand that maybe and probably it will look different, but they are taking steps towards God. Steps that even though they may not meet your expectations, but they're steps that God is using to grow them nonetheless. What if we let up on those people? Think about that. What if we drop the expectations? What if we stop trying to push our own agenda on top of someone else and their journey and their life and their faith walk? I mean, think about what that would do to their next step. I mean, would they be more likely to take it? Yes, absolutely. If we began to celebrate their small steps. Now, how about you? Let's talk about you and me just for a minute as individuals, personally. What if we set aside our expectations for what we assume that our relationship with God should look like? What if we set aside that expectation of what we feel our relationship with God should look like, and what if we allowed it to be what God wants it to be? What if? What if you not only saw those small steps that God is challenging and calling you to take on a daily basis, but what if you actually took those steps, and when you took them, you realized how huge of an impact they actually have? You see, all of our steps are different. And I think it's funny that a lot of times our kind of default position is that we begin to ignore other people's steps because they don't look like we feel they should. But that's not the point. I mean, here we have the prodigal son. We just unpacked that guy right there. He did not do a lick of anything spiritual. There was nothing earth-shattering or mind-boggling that he did. Nothing amazing was done from the boy to his father. All he did was step through the door. What if? What if as we moved into 2016, what if for the people of Riverside Wesleyan Church, for our immediate radius, what if we all of a sudden began to allow 2016 to be a year of celebration? What if it began to be like this crazy rave in the streets? Because you and I, we can tend to get so down on ourselves and on others, but the prodigal son is such a prime example of grace. I mean, this wayward son, he did not have a single checklist of things to do to earn back his father's approval. He had to do nothing. There was no standard of perfection. He just simply came home. He looked his dad in the eye and he said, "Dad, I'm here. Dad, I'm home. I messed up. And I will completely understand if I need to earn your love back." And his father reacted by throwing this huge, enormous house party to celebrate his son's steps back home, and boom, immediately restored his son to every single thing that he had left behind. Church, whatever your 2015 looked like, what if we began to roll into this new way of thinking, and we stopped looking at our faith as anything but steps? Because I think that it's about time that you and I began to learn how to celebrate the steps in our relationships, the steps in our own life, the steps in other people's lives. You might say, well, how do you go about that? Well, there's actually 3 kind of things to check off your list, if you will. The first one is you start by recognizing exactly where God brought you from. Think about that for a minute. And then, as you realize where it is that God brought you from, that means that you made some movement. That means that you made some steps. So then, how about you begin to celebrate the step that you took today? However big, however small. And then, the third one is this. How about here at Riverside Wesleyan Church, we begin to extend the party. Extend the party. Celebrate the steps of faith that people are doing in their lives. Celebrate that person who just read their Bible for the first time. Celebrate that person who began to pray instead of worrying or gossiping. Celebrate that person who's 5 days sober. Celebrate that person who all of a sudden didn't fly off the handle at their kids like they normally do. Church, just begin to celebrate the steps. And don't just make this seem like a cool gung-ho. That's a good idea. No, let's actually do this. Let's begin to give God the benefit of the doubt that He is actually leading people. And let's begin to encourage them in their walk with Jesus every step of the way. So let's do this. And I mean that literally, like, let's do this. Right here, right now. In just a minute, the band's gonna play. And we just simply wanted to give you an opportunity to extend the party. Over the next few minutes, we want you guys to come up and literally, in your own words, whatever you want to do, you can write it in code, you can write it, draw a picture. We have 1,300 markers over here, whatever it looks like for you. But over the next few minutes, we just simply want you to come up and just write down whatever steps you've taken recently, whatever that might look like, so that we in turn can look at this board and celebrate what God is doing with the people among us. So it doesn't matter how big, it doesn't matter how small. As you come up and write something on this board over here, just know, understand, and believe that all steps matter. All steps are worth celebrating. So church, when you're ready, make a move, extend the party.